All right, we are right at 2 p.m. Eastern, so we can go ahead and get started. My name is Samantha Forsko. I'm the Preservation Specialist at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. And when we first put this forum together, we were not expecting a pandemic. So I'm happy to discuss COVID-19 with you guys, but I do want to let you know that I'm not a pandemic expert by any means. So, you know, I will do my best to answer questions kind of in terms of how museums and cultural institutions should be thinking about these things, but we can also talk about other emergency preparedness topics that you might want to discuss as well. You can feel free to, it's just going to be me chatting, so please go ahead and write your questions for me over in the chat box, which it looks like lots of you have found. I will read the questions out loud and then try to answer them to the best of my ability. A little bit on my background while you guys are writing your questions. I actually grew up in Alaska, and I feel like a lot of times in Alaska, you're just kind of a born survivalist and are always sort of interested in being prepared because it really is about survival up there. So when I came down to the lower 48, as we call it, I was kind of shocked that people weren't as prepared as I had kind of grown up being, and was interested in museums and art and started working in that field, and then discovered that there was kind of this lack of preparedness in general at museums, cultural institutions in general, and kind of got involved in that. I studied emergency planning in cultural institutions as my master's thesis topic. Previous to my job at CCAHA, I was at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where I worked with them on putting together a revamped emergency plan and doing training for several years. And I have been at CCAHA for almost 5 years and been working on a lot of different emergency initiatives, the biggest one being probably the Pennsylvania Cultural Resilience Network, which is a statewide network that I run that kind of helps to provide a safety net for a lot of museums, libraries, archives, historic sites in general when dealing with emergencies and disaster preparedness topics. In Pennsylvania, our biggest issue here is flooding. So that is definitely the thing I have the most experience with. And I'm sure lots of you have also had little floods with a burst pipe or HVAC system leak, something like that. So having to deal with those, anything large or small, you know, I always say that the small incidents that happen are a good time to practice for the big ones. So that's definitely where the bulk of my experience is. But like I said, I've done a little bit of research on COVID-19 and I'm happy to talk about it. So please feel free to ask your questions. I'll start with some of the kind of things that people are constantly asking me about. The big question I get often is, where do I start with emergency planning? It's kind of a huge topic and it's difficult to know, you know, how to actually do that effectively. And one thing I like to tell people, recommend that people start with, is the pocket response plan. And I will post the link for that in the chat box in just a minute. But this pocket response plan was something that was developed by the Council of State Archivists a few years ago. And it's a really great little like one-page document that helps you just sort of start thinking about how to, what you should consider when you are trying to make an emergency plan. The pocket response plan itself is just one page that folds up, but it has a lot of sections that help you to sort of think about what is important in an emergency plan, and you can expand on those sections and take that pocket response plan, expand it, and make it into a full emergency plan. But if you're not sure where to start, that's always a good place. If you check out the website that I just linked to, you can see that there's a little bit of how to start with this. They have several different templates for state archives and records management places, government agencies. If you keep scrolling down to the bottom, there's one, the West Pass one is a little bit more customized for museums. And there's a little bit of directions on how to fill it out, but that is definitely my go-to on where to get started on this huge topic. I don't think that the Pocket Response Plan really deals too much with the issues that I think a lot of us are dealing with now with COVID-19, and that's the continuity of operations. I am sure a lot of us are tuning in from home right now, and you know, need to figure out how we are making that work. So that's something that you will definitely want to make sure to think about ahead of time. So when you're thinking about continuity of operation planning, it's always good to kind of think about what your critical functions are. So I'll just use an example at an institution. Maybe a critical function is the payroll for employees, right? Even if the institution is shut down, are you still going to pay your employees? So it's definitely a conversation you want to have ahead of time, so that you're not having to make that decision on the fly. But I know a lot of us probably did make the decision on the fly this time around, which is okay, we're learning. But anyway, after you kind of decide what your critical function is, you want to think about the activities that you need to happen in order to make that critical function happen. So in the example of payroll, what are the actions involved in that? We might have to approve time cards maybe, or make sure whoever needs to authorize the payment can do that authorization step. And that kind of leads into the next thing you have to think about with who is responsible for the critical function. So the primary contact for this might be whoever does that authorizing of the payment. Maybe it's your executive director, maybe it's your CFO, maybe it's your accountant, whoever that is. Your continuity of operations plan should have that person's contact information clearly laid out, and don't forget to have alternates and backups as well. The disaster is always going to happen when the executive director is on a vacation somewhere and unavailable, right? That seems to happen all the time. So always have your backups in place. And then lastly, you'll need to consider the resources you need to make that critical function happen. So again, in our payroll activity, you might need an internet access, and remote access to the payroll system are the things that you would need to make that happen. So how can you ensure that that happens even if you are off-site and the museum is closed or the institution is closed? So those are that's a really quick once over on continuity of operations planning, but ready.gov has a lot more resources on that. FEMA has some awesome templates that you can download and take a look at, and a ton more resources in general, including some distance learning, some online learning programs. And then you also would definitely want to get in touch with your local emergency management agency on that as well. So it could be the state, the county, the city, or the town. Kind of the rule of thumb there is the more local, probably the more luck you're going to have at getting in touch with them. So that's, yeah, a real quick once over on continuity of operations. I don't think that the kind of cultural heritage field in general has really done too much with continuity of operations planning, but I think this event is really opening our eyes to how important that is. I think Mark has a question, and I'm new to getting used to the Zoom software as well, so please bear with me. It looks like he's raising his hand, and I'm not quite sure how to. Mark, if you can type your question over in the chat box. I'll try to type over here too. So that we can see. Or if anyone else has any questions, you can go ahead and type them over there. So I came across yesterday, when I was doing a little bit of research on this, a really great resource put out by COSTEP Massachusetts, which is the Coordinated Statewide Emergency Preparedness Program in Massachusetts. and their website is, I think, CoStep MA. But they put out a really awesome resource about public health emergencies. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But something that they put was more collections guidance for dealing with this. The CDC, or excuse me, the World Health Organization has said that they're not certain how long the virus can survive on surfaces, but it does seem to behave like other coronaviruses. So studies suggest that coronaviruses may persist on surfaces for a few hours or up to several days, and this can vary under different conditions, like the type of surface that it's on, the temperature or humidity of the environment. So if you have had somebody come through your institution that you think might have a coronavirus or has tested positive for coronavirus, then you might be thinking about what you might want to be doing. And I really think the kind of best thing to do is like how we're all social distancing, but you can just kind of do the kind of same idea with your collections as well. I bet a lot of institutions are closed, and the coronavirus is not going to survive on the surfaces past several days, as it says. So hopefully by the time we're back in our institutions, the virus has been dead on your collections. We want to, there's the Minnesota Historical Society and the National Park Service all have guides to cleaning solutions and what can be used on collections materials. So that's kind of an important thing to think about. The things that are appropriate for collections materials are not always the things that is recommended by the CDC or World Health Organization as killing the virus. So that is a little bit tricky to figure that out, but so it might be better to temporarily isolate the objects and collections for a period until the virus will not survive, over using some more aggressive cleaning strategies. We usually don't want to use liquid or aerosol cleaners on books, unbound papers, or prints, or painted surfaces. And guidance on historic objects and furnitures, decorative arts, that kind of varies a lot, and it's not really clear what at this time. They're still doing a lot of research on it, but a lot of conservators tend not to recommend aggressive cleaning without knowing their long-term consequences. So it might be better to do that isolation strategy, like a double bag, smaller Ziploc baggie kind of thing at the item level. That's probably easiest. At the collection level, the easiest isolation strategy is to entirely shut off access for a period of time, which I know a lot of us are doing anyway. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation out there. We're not sure yet with a lot of this, but there's a lot of science going on. And I see people raising their hand, but I'm not sure how to get to them. Maybe Leah can help us out a little. And I'm hoping you guys can see where I pasted the link to the Pocket Response Plan. As I said, I'm still, this is my first Zoom forum also, so figuring it out with you guys. Okay, so I guess instead of raising your hand over there, if you want to come over here and type your questions into the chat box, the Zoom webinar chat, that is where I can answer them for everyone to see.
Here's a result from search.
Oop. Okay, so we have a link in there. Yep, that is a good link as well. The Massachusetts link that I was mentioning is right here. And that's a really great article. Like I said, it was kind of everything I needed to think about when I was preparing for this. The collections guidance section, it talks about cleaning versus isolation. It talks about preparing for building inaccessibility. The National Heritage Responders have it's a really like quick sheltering collections in place guide. It's a little bit different because we're not really, there's no big hurricane coming through that we're necessarily protecting our collections from. We're instead kind of, you know, just wanting to think about, is there a leaky pipe? Do we need to put something over top of that shelving unit underneath that pipe that tends to leak, because we're not going to be able to check on it. So you also are, you know, going to want to set up a schedule among essential staff to do building walkthroughs at some point during the closure as well. So that people can make sure everything, get eyeballs on things. So over at the CCAHA, where I work, we have our director of facilities is going by, I believe, every week to just kind of make sure everything is okay there, get eyeballs on stuff, as I said. We also have environmental monitoring. Our data loggers are set up so we can access them online, so we can kind of keep an eye on how things are going from there. So it's a really great resource. So definitely check it out. Mary is asking, other than flooding and continuity of operations during unexpected closures, such as what is occurring due to COVID now, what are some other types of emergency situations for which you'd recommend cultural institutions create preparedness plans, fire, weather events? So definitely fire, as we've been seeing that a lot in recent years as well. I do tend to say that all disasters, except for this one, I guess, end up as water disasters in the end. Usually if there's some kind of weather event, you might have a broken window, right? But that's because the tree blew in during the storm and now things are wet also. So I think starting with that flood, starting with the water event as kind of your first one, if that's the first thing you're planning for, that's a really good one to start with. And then that will also be useful in a lot of your other weather events. So you want to kind of do a risk assessment is one of the first steps to figure out what your institution is most at risk for. And those are the things that you want to start planning for. So if you're not in, you know, a volcano area, you don't need to plan for volcano preparedness, right? But maybe if you are in Hawaii and near one of the volcanoes, that is something you would want to do. There's a really great risk evaluation program that is run through the Foundation for the American Institute of Conservation, or the Advancement of Conservation. And I will post the link to that as well. Kind of walks you through how to do a risk assessment. And we're thinking risk right now really big, like are we in hurricane areas? Are we in, you know, earthquake areas? Things like that is our risk. But there's a lot of things that are little things that can turn into big risks as well. Like those HVAC leaks that I was talking about before. Mold can be a disaster. If we're somewhere in the South, mold can be a disaster for us at a cultural institution. Somewhere really hot and humid and we're getting a lot of molds. Molds can sometimes totally destroy an institution. So I always have mold and pests as part of my disaster plans as well when I help institutions, if that is something I'm particularly worried about for them. But yeah, kind of starting off with going through a risk evaluation and kind of figuring out where your areas are, kind of the biggest things that you need to be worried about. Start with those and then moving on. And of course, it's going to be different for every institution. A lot of that's located or based on where you're located. Maybe you have some other sort of special situations going on. I worked with a site that was a historical site on the base of a nuclear power plant. So they had some, you know, specific needs going on there as well. So it really depends. It's really a individual institution thing. And so you want to get started with that risk assessment so you are spending your time in the right places. That is a good question, Mary. And that risk evaluation link that I gave you, they have they really kind of walk you through the whole thing, including a walkthrough checklist. So you can download that and kind of take it with you and start looking around your site to kind of think about what are your risks, what are the things that are you know, might be problems for you. It kind of helps to do a sort of guided so that you know, go look at the building exterior and you think about how is the roof overhanging the flashing and is the caulking intact? Like things that you might never have thought about. They have these kind of prompts for you to take a closer look at the stuff you might walk through every day. So it's a really great tool. We also offer some risk assessment programs through the Conservation Center, CCAHA. We usually do an NEH funded risk assessment program, which people can apply for, and then you will get one of our preservation specialists to come out and take a look at your site and help you to go through that process as well. We have a couple of recorded webinars too on how to do risks, you know, intro to emergency planning and risk assessment that are recorded on the CCAHA website. So I recommend taking a look at those as well to kind of start thinking about risk assessment and how to get started on that. Oh, another great question from Katrina. She is asking, do you have any preferred recommended list of emergency supplies and equipment to have on hand? Yes, I do. I actually have a list already put together on the CCAHA website, which I'm hoping you guys have, since you've signed up for this webinar, I'm hoping you have maybe already found it, but I will give you the link real quick to our resources page. And there's on there, I have there's a lot of different emergency planning things, but there is in particular one that is suggested materials for a supply kit, an emergency supply kit. So in there, you know, it's pretty general, I would say. There's, you know, it's more for like a water emergency. And it's sort of just something to get you to kind of start thinking about things. Like, for example, I have on there, you know, under the documentation section, a digital camera with memory cards and battery, as well as a disposable camera. Maybe everybody has cell phones that has, you know, picture taking abilities, and maybe that one isn't necessary for you. But you do want to think about, is it possible that you will have some people responding who don't have a fancy phone with a camera that, or, you know, is there going to be some reason why they can't access that? So you might need to have that in there. It's really hard to know kind of how much of things you should have. That's another question people ask, like, how much plastic sheeting should I have? And that's, you know, there isn't really kind of like a one size fits all for that answer. It's going to really depend on the size of your collection and all of that kind of information. You want to try to aim to have to kind of fully handle a smaller emergency. And what I mean by smaller emergency is something like an HVAC leak or a pipe leak, one of those kind of smaller things, or something to last you the first 24 hours of a larger disaster until you can get more supplies. most emergencies cultural institutions face are minor. They're typically affecting fewer than 250 volumes or 150 cubic feet of records. That's typically what we see. So those emergencies are usually like roof leaks, broken water lines, burst pipes, backed up floor drains, that kind of thing. So that's typically where I have people kind of try to have enough supplies to deal with that type of emergency, and then hopefully you can be building on it a little bit, and if you need to one day, you can have more. So there's some really great, they have some kits online that you might have seen, kind of like the React packs and things like that. I think Gaylord sent some. There's some spill kits from New Pig, things like that out there. Those are great things to get you started on. I have kind of found that they are even more general than my general list of emergency supplies. They're not really custom for collections objects. There's no blotter in there or anything like that, which is a really important absorbent product that we need usually when we're dealing with the salvage for collections. So you can start with one of those kind of ready-made packs, and I think that's a great way to get started if it's just kind of feeling overwhelming. But I would kind of recommend that you supplement it with some other things out there. Jennifer's asking, what would be the optimal way to prepare for a hurricane other than not being located in a hurricane-prone area, accounting for rain and heavy winds? Yeah. So the sheltering collections in place guidelines, I mentioned that the National Heritage Responders put together. They it's kind of it's thinking about what to do for just that exact situation. And I'm pulling up there. It's just a one sheet, so I'm pulling that up right now. Talking and typing at the same time is hard. But so you essentially want to kind of think about where the collections are safest in your building. If there's an inside area that you can, where it's not near any of the outside walls or near any windows or anything like that, that is a good place to be moving collections to. And you also want to kind of think about, is there any kind of draping with plastic sheeting, things like that that you can use. You want to make sure that your materials are raised off the floor and protected from above. So plastic sheeting from above and raised off the floor. So that way you're kind of protected from both sides of things. I have worked with several institutions down in the Gulf Coast, most recently one outside of Biloxi, Mississippi, and they have the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. They have a really great hurricane plan that mostly involves kind of moving everything inside, like from the outside into the inner area. And of course, they've had to, being located down there near Biloxi, they've had to practice this many times, which is important that you go through actually practicing it. And I don't usually recommend, moving artifacts too much, only in extreme situations, but especially with that hurricane situation, it can change so quickly. And, I think we've seen it a lot where it starts off as a category 1, seems like it's nothing. And then even right before it hits it gets to go up a lot faster. So you want to think about when you're going to enact this, because you don't necessarily want to be moving things around unnecessarily, but you can think about how you might want to do that, what the criteria are for moving the collections around. Some other things, well, I've been thinking about continuity of operations a lot. I'm sure lots of you have, with what's going on, currently. But something else to think about that I didn't necessarily think of right away, but is that kind of protecting your computer and your server and all of that as well. We are all working from home. So what happens if that server goes down, and what happens if there's a leak while we're all gone and your computer gets ruined and you don't have access to things. So you might want to think about protecting your computers as well as the actual collections, because a lot of times, you know, when you lose that intellectual control over the collection, then it's tough, right, to get back into it. And hi, Kate. Glad that you're joining us. So I guess we can talk, since we're kind of living in a disaster right now, I guess we can talk a little bit with you guys. How are you all working from home, and is that working out? Have you already seen things that you need to be kind of changing with the procedures there? I think right now is a really good time for us to be kind of looking at what's working right now with this working remotely thing, and what isn't working, and using that to inform our continuity of operations plan. And maybe you guys have some ideas already that you have learned from this experience we're having right now. So please feel free to share some of that too. I'm sure the other attendees would like to hear more about how your experience has been working from home. It's tough when we work with collections, because what do you do from home if you don't have collections to work with? Well, it seems like a lot of you are actually at the office. That's great. But yeah, it could change very soon. That's a good point. Kate is mentioning that their biggest issue is trying to provide reference without being there in person. And I bet she's talking about providing reference to visitors. And I've seen so much interesting stuff about how museums are engaging with their people from remote locations, and all of the kind of online programming that they've been doing. It's very interesting. Might be the way of the future, right? I see Cole is mentioning that he is supposed to be working on his emergency preparedness plan. I think that that's great. So a lot of people I know are working on those backlogged policies they never get to work on. So that's, I think, a really good time to do that. Yeah, Mary is mentioning that she's working from home but didn't prepare so well. She has many of her files stranded on her office desktop and no way to access them remotely. And I think we're learning a lot about that, how to make sure we can access things. In fact, Leah and I, when we were setting up for this webinar, we're like, oh wait, that file's on the computer at work, but we figured it out, obviously. But yeah, it's good reminder to save things to the cloud, externally backup, make sure you can access things, and do it regularly, because you don't know when you're all of a sudden going to be gone, right? Or the storm comes through and everything's gone and you don't have access to anything. So good reminders for sure. Michael said that you guys had just redone your COOP plan and a few weeks ago. Michael, is that are you seeing that the COOP plan is working, or are you seeing that there's areas to be improved upon? As I was sort of mentioning in the beginning, I don't want to say but when a small disaster happens, and this is not a small disaster by any means, but when a small disaster happens, I do like to, compare it to the emergency plan and see what worked and what didn't work, and how we can improve on it, even from the small things. So if you just did a COOP plan, this would be a great time making sure to go through it after we finally get back, or even during, since we have all this time right now, to take a look at what's working and what isn't, and what you would want to change. I'm glad to see so many people working on their emergency plans during this time. That is great. Oh, a good question here about D plan. So, okay, the D plan, it is there. So it's supposed to be, it's on coming out anytime now, a new and improved version of D plan. There is a grant project out there called the Performing Arts Readiness Program, PAR. You might have heard of it through Lyrasis. So they got a big grant through the Mellon Foundation to look at the performing arts world and how the performing arts world might be able to learn some from the cultural heritage world about how to prepare better for disasters, which I know we in the cultural heritage world were always like, but we're not prepared, but we are better prepared than the performing arts groups. So they are kind of making some people, getting some people working together on that. And as part of the funding, they were going to revamp D-Plan to not only because that website is not maintained anymore, to get the cultural heritage one sort of up to speed again, but then to also add a module in there about performing arts groups. So, and that was supposed to be released. I'm sure it has been kicked back now, given the virus, but I believe it was supposed to be released at the end of last year, and I guess it has been postponed. I don't have a further update on it, but it is forthcoming. I know that people might have been saying that, but it is. It will be here soon. It will be there eventually, I know. And if you guys don't know what D-Plan is, I will link to the old website here, and you should go take a look at it just for a good laugh. It definitely looks like it is made sometime in like 1999, the website. But basically, this was a project created from the Northeast Document Conservation Center, NEDCC, located up there in Boston. And they basically, it's kind of set up so you can they'll ask you a bunch of prompts and you can input information and it'll kind of spit out an emergency plan in the end. And as you guys were mentioning, it's not maintained anymore. This current website is not, it's a bit clunky to say the least, but as I said, it will be a new and improved version, is supposed to be released soon. And I unfortunately don't have more details than that, but that is definitely a good tool also. I do think that there is a lot of value in going through the process, not necessarily, like, so even if you do use D-Plan and you have it kind of spit out a finished emergency plan for you in the end, I really would recommend kind of going through it with a fine-tooth comb and going through it with your staff, because I think there is a lot of value in going through the actual process together with the staff and yourself. You just kind of tend to know more what's going on. And I say that as someone who comes in and works as a consultant with institutions to write emergency plans. I actually don't super recommend doing that because you can't, it's not as as a consultant, I can come in, and I've thought about this obviously a lot, but the kind of value of doing the disaster plan is you thinking about it and your institution thinking about it. So it is one of those things that I think is a little bit better to do at your institution. Maybe have the guidance from a consultant, but wanting to do kind of the bulk of it yourself, I think is the best way to approach it. So I'm also curious how many of you guys have up-to-date emergency plans. Do you have, I know a lot of you said you were working on updating them right now during this break, but is there anyone that already has a really up-to-date plan that might want to share a little bit about how they did that, or someone who doesn't have anything and is here to learn where to start? And I hope I've already given you some tools on where to start there, but yeah, curious to hear about that. Cool. Yes, we have one, but it hasn't been reviewed since 2007 and doesn't have a pandemic section. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of pandemic sections added after this. But like I said, I think better dealing with the pandemic is that continuity of operations plan. I know a lot of institutions don't have that, and I think that's kind of the way to go in dealing with a lot of this. And don't feel bad about having one that is not updated. You wouldn't believe how many institutions I work with that don't have an up-to-date plan. Abby is saying they have a plan that was updated May Day last year. That, you know, I think that's great. Abby, you're right on board. And May Day, as Abby is mentioning, is May Day is May 1st usually, and we kind of use that as a day to kind of remind ourselves to do something with emergency preparedness. So maybe it's reviewing the plan, maybe it's doing some training, doing a tabletop exercise, making sure that the institution actually knows how to use the plan. That can be an important thing to do. So May Day, May 1st is kind of a reminder to do that if you haven't. The other kind of benchmark that I like to use is National Preparedness Month, which is September. And there's a lot of events. If you look at your kind of local emergency management agencies, a lot of them are already doing National Preparedness Day events that you can get in on. Maybe there's some continuity of operations workshops that they might be holding this year that maybe in September you might want to take a look at. But there's good time. A good way to remember is to set those dates. When I was in Los Angeles, we also used the Northridge earthquake, which was now I'm forgetting the date. It was in January sometime, but we would use that as our kind of drill date where we would do a specific earthquake preparedness drill, because that was our big earthquake that caused a lot of damage, and it was an easy, of course now I can't remember the date, it's been a while, but it was easy when we were there to remember that date. So if you have things like that to help you kind of remember to check in, May Day, maybe just read through the plan. National Preparedness Month, you can participate in something that's already happening, and in a, you know, reminder that disasters actually do happen by pointing it out on an anniversary of something, like the Northridge earthquake or whatever might be the big event in your area. Yeah, it's a good opportunity right now for sure to look at those disaster plans, as most of you are noting. So I'm glad to see that that's happening. So I mentioned training just then kind of briefly, and I'll talk a little bit more about training here as you guys have any questions or anything about it. But you know, a plan is essentially just a piece of paper if you don't do any training on it, right? It's kind of useless if the staff doesn't know it exists. And a lot of times people ask me how, you know, training is a lot, right? How do we do it and make it manageable? And I think a lot of times people are thinking about the training that I often run, which is a giant kiddie pool filled up with precious artifacts from Goodwill. And, you know, we will soak them and have people, and that's great training, but that is very time intensive and difficult. And that obviously is difficult to set up on your own, especially if you don't have kind of the staff expertise, or the funds to hire someone like me to come in and just do it for you. So that can be difficult, but there are a lot of other resources that it doesn't need to make it so overwhelming, and tabletop exercises are a really good example of those. So a tabletop exercise, I kind of think of it, as I was mentioning, I lived in Los Angeles for a while, so I kind of think of it as like a script read at a you know, audition or something, where you're just kind of talking through your disaster plan. So you'll have somebody kind of prepare a disaster, you know, in theory, right? Like, here's a disaster scenario that you'll just discuss, and then you'll kind of bring in all the key players to sit around the table and just talk through what you would do. You want to actually make sure you have your disaster plan there, so you can be like, oh, we'll reference the salvage guidelines on page 10 or whatever, so that you can actually use your disaster plan while you're kind of talking through what it is you would actually do in a disaster. Those are super easy to put on. There's a lot of, FEMA has a lot of, you know, here's a scenario. So you don't even have to make up the scenario yourself. You can go find some at FEMA online. You can also, this is another great one to get involved with your local emergency management agency, which is definitely a person that I would try to reach out to. Maybe not right now because they're going to be very busy with the coronavirus, but once you guys get back in, when you're updating your plans, you definitely want to talk to them The local emergency managers will often provide training for you and often free of cost. I know that that's definitely something they do in a lot of the counties out here in Pennsylvania. They will come in and they will lead a tabletop exercise for you. They will, you know, if you want to do some kind of, if you want a place to do some training, they'll often let you do that there as well. So they're a really great resource and can offer a lot. And you don't need to kind of think that you have to put on this training all by yourself, right? There's people there who will help you out, and that is their job, those local emergency management agencies. So I would definitely reach out to them. Now, keep in mind, they're not going to have kind of the museum, cultural institution focus that we might all have, the library focus. You know, they don't understand that mold is a disaster, right? It's like mold can ruin our artifacts. It's not a disaster to that, you know, it's not a great situation, but it's not a full-blown disaster as it kind of is for us in a lot of situations. So, you know, kind of keep that in mind when you're working with them. But it's been, I have really enjoyed working with our local first responders. They've been all very interested in learning more about how we respond to the cultural materials in our collections. And, you know, they're not going to come to you. You have to go to them, but they will be happy that you came to them and eager participants for sure. So Ilhan is asking, the emergencies usually happen Friday after 5, don't they always, right? People on site are having a hard time to make a simple decision. Is there a single sheet action plan template that should be accessible by the night and weekend supervisors? And yes, that pocket response plan that I sent to you, the very first thing, that is a single sheet action plan right there. It has some great things to do. Something you might want to consider with that pocket response plan is to have different versions for different people. So you might not necessarily want the night and weekend supervisors to have, you know, all of the same contact information that you would want your executive director to have on hand, for example. So you might make a special pocket response plan just for the night and weekend supervisors that's different than your regular full-time staff. But yeah, definitely go check out that website. It has a bunch of different templates, and you can kind of, the beauty of, they have Word versions of it, so you can mix and match and copy and paste. And the beauty of it is designed to be really customizable. So it's really a great way to get at just that exact thing you're mentioning, Ilhan, about having a single sheet action plan. Of course, you can always make your own, but I think the pocket response plan kind of helps you to think about what the crucial areas are to think about when pulling that together. And you can design it kind of however you want. You don't have to use that template. You can, you know, take the information and use it elsewhere. But good to be thinking about what are the night and weekend people going to need versus what are our weekday staff going to need. So we have just about 12 more minutes left before we're gonna call it a day. So if there's any other last minute questions, please get those in. And if there's any other, you know, tidbits you might want to share with your fellow friends about what you've been doing during this time. Mary Beth is asking about the Minnesota Historical Society website. I'm looking it up right now to get that for you. They have a housekeeping guide. We actually also have a housekeeping guide on the CCAHA website that lists some of this stuff. So the link I'm giving to you guys right now is kind of an example of their housekeeping handbook, which does give more information on how to clean specific artifacts, which is helpful. The National Park Service, and as I said, I'm Googling and talking at the same time, so that's hard. has a good list of things that kind of more specific things, material, cleaning solutions and things like that to take a look at as well. I'm sorry, it's hard to talk and type at the same time. I'm having a hard time finding this National Park Service one, but I'll keep looking. You also might want to check out just the chemical safety data sheets as well. That helps to know kind of what is in the chemicals that you're actually using. Oh, and here is the conservagram. I just found it. So that second link is it's a National Park Service article on safer cleaning alternatives for the museum and visitor center. So it'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can use to clean. So the things we want to think about with this is the CDC and the World Health Organization have recommended that alcohol-based cleaners and things like that are the best at cleaning the, killing the coronavirus. The issue is that a lot of those are really bad for our collections. So that's why I'm kind of going with the isolation thing might be a better route for us to go. Then that is a good thing to consider. Jennifer has a great question, which I hope you guys will answer too. What is the worst archival disaster you've all encountered? Mine was not an archival disaster, but it was at an institution where we had moved they had just moved their collections room to a place that was formerly a bathroom, which was a really bad idea, and had a big sewage backup into the collections workspace, which was lovely, as you guys can imagine. Whole other sort of health emergency as well, and mold is a big one I'm seeing people say. I think the biggest disasters are kind of like this one we're having right now, where it not only is bad for the collections, but it's a human health and safety issue as well. Mark is asking, has anyone dealt with anyone wishing to use archival collections for research at this time of the COVID-19 pandemic? If so, what guidance are you using in terms of limited access or non-access? So definitely interested to hear what anybody else might have to say about what they are doing with limiting access to their collections during this time of pandemic. It does seem like a lot of institutions are closing, and I cannot tell you if it's the right idea to close your institution or not. It's gonna really depend a lot on what's going on in your area. I would look to your local emergency management agencies to see what they are recommending. If they are saying no groups of no larger groups of 10 or whatever it is, then you should follow those guidelines as well. So it's different everywhere around the country right now. I know over here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, we're pretty locked down. There's a lot of things that are going on right now, but and it's different from place to place. So you got to kind of make that decision for yourself. It does seem that a lot of people on this call are doing remote research requests only, which is, I think, a good idea. Some people are closed. A lot of people are taking out of their seats in their reading room to try to respect social distancing guidelines. I think this is a pretty influx kind of situation. I would prepare to get closed down entirely, though, if I were you guys on this call right now. Trying to scan documents, yeah, that's it. It's good to make it so that people can access them remotely and online is great. Yeah, it's a tough time. I think there's going to be a lot of literature put out after this on museums, cultural institutions, and remote access to collections after this, which I'm excited to see what the conversation is there. Talking about scanning as much as possible, which is which is great. How many of you already had digital preservation plans or digitization plans going for your institution? This might be another time to kind of think about that. What are the materials that are requested frequently that should be high priorities for scanning? You know, that's better that's going to preserve them better anyway, even when it's not pandemic situation, right? Having people not touching things as much is going to help. Anyway, so you maybe could use this time as people are requesting to access materials, figuring out that which ones are priorities for digitization and which ones people are kind of wanting the most access to, and can help to inform that. You can use this time as kind of a data collection time and figure out what to do next. Great, so just about 5 more minutes left. Thank you guys for all coming out virtually to hang out today and talk disasters, even though we're kind of living one currently. Hopefully it'll all turn around here soon, and we'll get back with our collections. I know probably a lot of us miss working with them, for those of us who are at home, and probably those of us who are still in the office are a little nervous. So hopefully it all gets turned around quick. I do believe that this webinar or this forum is being recorded. So if you missed anything, we will be posting it to a YouTube link later. And Leah, our preservation services assistant, is taking care of all of that. So she will get that information out to you guys, participants, later. And you can check out some of our other forums that we've done. We have another forum coming up, I believe, pretty soon, not April, but May, I'm pretty sure, on photograph preservation. So that should be interesting. And please do check out some of those resources. Check out all of the CCAHA resources. We have a ton out there that are relevant to this. So definitely take a look at those, and happy disaster planning.